Imagine being fined for wearing a medal you earned in service to your country. That's exactly what happened to this veteran. But when the judge thought he had the upper hand, he didn't realize the veteran was a legal genius ready to fight back. Stay tuned. This story will blow your mind. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. It all began on a rainy Tuesday morning in downtown Atlanta, the kind of gray, drizzly day that seemed to soak the city's spirit. People rushed inside the courthouse, umbrellas dripping, shoes squeaking on the polished marble floors. Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was tense, the kind that clings to the air before something unforgettable happens. The room buzzed with low conversation as people filled the benches. Some were there for minor infractions, others for more serious disputes. But when the door at the back of the courtroom creaked open, the noise died down. Heads turned. An elderly African-American man stepped in. His walk was slow but steady, the kind of stride that tells you he's carried heavy things in life, both physical and emotional. He wore a crisp gray suit that seemed too formal for a property dispute. But what really caught everyone's eye was the military medal pinned to his chest. Bronze, worn, but gleaming proudly in the courtroom light. It was a bronze star, one of the U.S. military's highest honors for bravery in combat. A symbol that spoke without words. This man had seen war, had risked his life, had fought for the very justice system he was now standing before. He moved to the defendant's table, placed a leather folder down with deliberate care, and adjusted the medal slightly, more out of respect than vanity. His name was Henry Wallace, a 72-year-old Vietnam veteran, retired Army intelligence officer, and as the court would soon learn, a man who did not back down easily. From the elevated bench, the judge looked on. Judge Margaret Harper, a well-known figure in the city's legal circles. She was known for being tough, no-nonsense, and famously intolerant of what she called courtroom distractions. Her eyes locked onto the medal. Her lips tightened. "You there," she said sharply, pointing at Wallace. "Remove that medal." The room froze. A few murmurs trickled in from the gallery. Everyone was watching. Wallace turned his head toward her slowly, confusion flickering in his eyes. "I beg your pardon, Your Honor," I said. She repeated, more firmly now. "Remove that medal. This is not a place for costumes." A wave of quiet gasps rolled through the courtroom. Some couldn't believe what they were hearing. Others leaned in, sensing something big was about to happen. Wallace stood up, his back straightening to its full height. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply said, calmly and clearly, "I earned this, Your Honor, in Vietnam." Judge Harper didn't flinch. "Then keep your pride outside this courtroom. Inside, we follow protocol." It was as if time stopped. You could feel the collective intake of breath from the gallery. Wallace looked down at the medal. His memories of fallen comrades, of war zones and sacrifice flickering behind his eyes, and then back at the judge. But he didn't remove it. He didn't say another word. That's when the gavel came down. Bang! "Mr. Wallace, you are fined $100 for contempt of court," the judge declared coldly. "Let's proceed. No questions, no discussion, just the weight of a gavel and the sting of humiliation." Wallace sat back down, composed but clearly insulted. Not just as a veteran, but as a human being. His dignity had just been fined, literally, but he didn't storm out. He didn't raise his voice or protest. Instead, he quietly opened his leather folder, preparing his documents. Because he hadn't just come to court to wear a medal. He'd come to win a case, and what no one in that courtroom knew, not the judge, not the opposing lawyer, not even the spectators, was that this elderly man in a gray suit was about to flip the entire case upside down. The tension in the courtroom was already thick, but as the clerk read the charges, a new kind of hush fell over the gallery. The case, on paper, sounded almost laughably minor, a property dispute. specifically over a parking space. But as the proceedings began, it became immediately clear this wasn't just about concrete, cars, or curb lines. The plaintiff, a wealthy, sharply dressed real estate developer named Gordon Blake, owner of several properties in the Atlanta area, known for his aggressive expansion tactics. The kind of man who always sat with his arms folded and his nose slightly upturned, like the world owed him something. He spoke through his lawyer, a smug, young professional, who looked fresh out of a top law school and oozed confidence. The defendant, Mr. Henry Wallace, 72 years old, Vietnam veteran, retired Army intelligence officer, and representing himself. According to the complaint, Wallace had parked his old pickup truck on a gravel patch adjacent to Blake's luxury apartment development. Blake claimed it was private property, that Wallace had trespassed, damaged landscaping, and even threatened staff. His lawyer spoke with dramatic flair, using words like aggression, defiance, and property abuse. But Wallace stood silently, expression calm, hands clasped, medal still proudly pinned to his chest. When it was his turn to speak, he stepped forward and addressed the court, not with theatrics, but with clarity and confidence. "Your Honor," he began, "that patch of land has been public for over 40 years. It's an easement, a public right-of-way that's been used by the neighborhood since before Mr. Blake even bought the property." He then produced several documents, old county maps, zoning board approvals, and even photographs dating back decades that showed the area being used as a walking path and parking spot by countless residents. "This isn't trespassing," he said. "It's public use, and I have the records to prove it." Judge Harper narrowed her eyes. She scanned the documents briefly, then looked up. "Mr. Wallace, are you a licensed attorney?" "No, ma'am," he replied calmly. "But I've studied every book your licensed attorneys read, and some they don't." A chuckle rippled through the crowd, but the judge didn't smile. She leaned forward. "You sure you want to represent yourself in this matter? You know what's at stake?" Wallace nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I trust myself." That answer seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have. Not arrogant, not defensive, just honest. But the tension in the room wasn't just about land disputes. It wasn't just about parking. It was about power. On one side, a man with wealth, lawyers, and influence. A man who saw the system as a tool for control. On the other, a man with lived experience, a deep understanding of the law, and the courage to stand alone against all odds. The air in the courtroom felt electric, like everyone knew this wasn't really about where a truck was parked. It was about who had the right to park it there in the first place. It was about identity, history, and dignity. As Wallace continued, he pointed out that Blake had been trying to acquire nearby land for months, often by accidentally fencing off public areas and intimidating longtime residents into selling. Wallace's appearance in court, he revealed, wasn't just a defense of his truck, but a stand against a man who had been bullying an entire community. "You're not just trying to take that land from me," Wallace said, turning briefly toward Blake. "You're trying to erase everything that came before you. But you picked the wrong patch of ground this time. I've defended ground before, and I'll do it again." Judge Harper said nothing for a moment. She glanced between Wallace and the developer's lawyer, the contrast between them almost poetic. One relying on entitlement, the other on earned knowledge. Then she leaned back in her chair, folding her hands thoughtfully. "Well then, Mr. Wallace," she said at last, "let's hear the rest." And just like that, the courtroom shifted. What began as a trivial complaint had now become a battleground of principle. The gallery leaned in closer. The court stenographer stopped yawning. Even the bailiff's posture straightened. Everyone realized this wasn't just some minor case. On a rainy Tuesday morning, this was a fight for truth, and one old veteran wasn't backing down. What happened next turned the courtroom upside down. Until that moment, most people in the room, including Judge Harper, had likely assumed Henry Wallace was just another old man clinging to his pride, maybe a little stubborn, a little defiant, and a bit too proud of his mettle. But when he calmly reached into his leather folder and laid it open on the table, the energy in the room shifted completely. Out came documents, not just a few loose pages, but neatly organized files with color-coded tabs, section dividers, and legal citations meticulously marked. It looked more like the inside of a seasoned attorney's trial binder than anything a self-represented defendant would bring. Wallace stood slowly, cleared his throat once, and began. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady and respectful. "If I may direct your attention to Tab A. That's the Fulton County zoning map from 1981. He held up a laminated document for the court to see. Then, with a few short strides, he handed a copy to the judge, another to the clerk, and a third to the opposing counsel, who blinked in surprise as he took it. "As you'll see," Wallace continued, "this section of land, labeled parcel 72C, was designated as a public easement, maintained by the city, open for use by all residents. That status has never been altered, as shown in the Planning Commission's minutes under Tab B." He flipped to the next section and held up another document. The judge leaned forward now, reading the highlighted text. The courtroom, moments, earlier buzzing with low murmurs and shifting seats, had fallen completely silent. Even the opposing lawyer looked visibly rattled. Wallace didn't stop there. He walked the courtroom through 3 decades of zoning laws, legal precedents, and community development notes. Every point he made was backed by primary documents, official city records, ordinance numbers, court cases. At one point, he even quoted directly from a county board meeting transcript. I quote, "The 72C easement shall remain public access indefinitely, and no commercial development may restrict access or repurpose it without council approval." Judge Harper's eyebrows lifted. She checked the transcript he provided. It matched word for word. It became increasingly clear that Wallace knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't grasping at straws or making vague references. He was walking the court, step by step, through a masterclass in land use law. Then came the moment that no one saw coming. Wallace paused, reached into a separate folder, and pulled out a yellowed, official-looking document with a signature at the bottom. "This," he said, "is a memorandum. I wrote in 1987 as a civilian consultant for the city's urban planning initiative. I helped draft the very zoning code Mr. Blake's team is attempting to reinterpret." The courtroom gasped. Even the judge looked stunned. "You wrote the code?" she asked, trying to mask her surprise. Wallace nodded. "Parts of it. I was a military analyst back then, transitioning into civil planning. I was asked to contribute due to my background in logistics and land use strategy. I didn't have a law degree, but I knew how to write a framework that would protect neighborhoods from the very thing happening here today." The silence that followed was heavy, not with doubt, but with respect. Judge Harper, who had started the day stern, skeptical, even dismissive of Wallace, now studied him with fresh eyes. Her scowl had softened into something more thoughtful, almost apologetic. "Where did you go to law school?" she asked finally, almost in disbelief. Wallace offered a small smile, tilting his head. "I didn't," he said, "but I read every book they assign in one." The courtroom erupted in quiet laughter, not mocking, but admiring. A few people even nodded. The bailiff cracked a grin. Even the opposing attorney, looking somewhat embarrassed, shuffled awkwardly in his seat. Judge Harper tapped her pen against her notepad. She said nothing for a few seconds, then finally leaned back in her chair, almost as if re-evaluating everything she thought she knew about this man. "Well, Mr. Wallace," she said slowly, "you've certainly earned your time in this courtroom. Please, continue." And just like that, the power had shifted. No longer was Henry Wallace just an old man in a suit with a medal. He was now the most commanding presence in the room, not because of rank or robe or reputation, but because of one thing: truth backed by knowledge. In that moment, the courtroom wasn't witnessing a simple case. They were witnessing a masterclass in humility, brilliance, and justice. You could have heard a pin drop. Gone were the sideways glances, the skeptical stares, the silent judgment that had filled the courtroom just an hour earlier. Now every person in that room, from the seasoned bailiff at the door to the young intern in the back, sat frozen, eyes locked on the man standing in the center, Henry Wallace. No longer just the defendant, no longer the old man with the medal. No longer the person everyone had underestimated. He had just dismantled the prosecution's argument with precision, humility, and facts. But now, he stood quietly for a beat, then slowly reached up and gently touched the bronze medal pinned over his heart. It glinted in the light, simple, unassuming, but carrying a weight that no one in that courtroom could fully comprehend. Then, he spoke. "That medal," he said, voice low but unwavering, "is not just metal. It's not decoration. It's not a prop." He paused, letting the words hang. "It's the weight of every friend I lost overseas. Every man I watched fall beside me. Every promise we made to come home and fight for something better. That medal carries them with me, every day. I wear it not for pride, but for memory, for honor." The courtroom seemed to inhale all at once. "I wore it here today because I wanted the truth to stand with me. Because I've already fought once for justice. And if I have to do it again in this courtroom with nothing but paper and principle, I will." There was a long silence after that. No one moved. The opposing attorney looked down, avoiding eye contact. Even the developer, Gordon Blake, who had once leaned smugly in his seat, now sat uncomfortably stiff, his lips drawn tight. And then everyone turned to the bench. Judge Harper sat stone still, eyes locked on Wallace. The transformation on her face was striking. Hours ago, she had barked at Wallace to remove his medal, calling it a costume. She had fined him without hesitation, without asking a single question. But now, her expression betrayed something she had perhaps not felt in years behind that gavel: humility. Her hand moved slowly toward her gavel, not to slam it, but to steady herself. She looked at Wallace, and for a moment, her voice didn't. "Come." Then, finally, with a softness that surprised the room, she spoke. "Mr. Wallace," she said, her voice quieter than before, "this court owes you an apology." There it was. Not from weakness, but from recognition. From the realization that she had judged a book not just by its cover, but by the color of its spine. She had seen the suit, the self-representation, the medal, and made assumptions. Assumptions that had just been obliterated by the strength of Wallace's evidence, his poise, and above all, his story. "You've demonstrated not just legal clarity," she continued, "but a kind of courage we don't see often in this room. Courage not to fight, but to stand firm when every eye in the room doubts you." Wallace nodded, but said nothing. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't smirking. He was just steady, unshaken, a quiet kind of hero. The judge then turned to the plaintiff's table. "The court finds no evidence of trespassing or harassment," she said firmly. "In fact, the documentation suggests the plaintiff knowingly misrepresented the land's designation. This case is dismissed." A ripple of approval moved through the gallery. Some people clapped softly. A few even stood. But perhaps most moving was what came next. Judge Harper slowly rose from her bench. She walked around the stand and approached Wallace directly. And in front of the entire courtroom, she extended her hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice catching just slightly. Wallace accepted the handshake, then offered something even more rare, a small smile. "Sometimes," he said gently, "you just have to remind people what truth looks like." The courtroom erupted, not in cheers but in silence, the kind of silence that speaks louder than any applause. The kind of silence that says, We were just part of something bigger than a case. We witnessed justice with a pulse, and at its center stood a man who had once fought for his country on the battlefield and just defended it again in a courtroom, with only a folder of papers and the memory of fallen brothers on his chest. As the sound of the gavel echoed through the courtroom, signaling the case's dismissal, a wave of stunned silence swept the room, quickly followed by something no one had expected that day: justice with consequences. Judge Harper, her voice now confident and unwavering, looked directly at the developer, Gordon Blake. "This court finds your actions not only misleading," she said firmly, "but a misuse of public trust and judicial time. Filing a claim based on false property assertions is not just unethical, it is illegal." She turned to her clerk and added, "Mr. Blake is fined $5,000 for knowingly misrepresenting land ownership and wasting taxpayer resources." The courtroom held its collective breath, but she wasn't finished. "And if this happens again," she added sharply, "you will be held in contempt." Gordon Blake, red-faced and fuming, muttered something under his breath, but quickly quieted when his own attorney elbowed him in warning. For the first time, he looked small. Henry Wallace, meanwhile, simply began gathering his papers. He wasn't basking in the attention or soaking in the moment. He moved with quiet dignity, just as he had when he entered that morning. Then, just as he turned to leave, Judge Harper rose from her seat once more. "Mr. Wallace," she said. He stopped, turned respectfully. "You may keep your medal on in my courtroom," she said, her voice resonating through every corner of the room. "In fact, I insist." At that moment, something rare happened. Something that doesn't belong to courtroom protocol but to human emotion. The gallery, once skeptical, now electrified, erupted in applause. People stood. Some even wiped away tears. The bailiff, who had once been stone-faced, clapped right along with the crowd. Reporters who had quietly occupied the back rows now rushed forward, scrambling to record every second. Flashbulbs popped as Wallace stepped into the hallway, instantly surrounded by journalists. "Mr. Wallace, can we get a statement? What would you say to veterans watching this right now? Did you expect to win like that?" He held up a hand, signaling for calm, and then gave a statement so humble and real, it practically broke the internet. "I didn't come here to win. I came here to stand for what was right," he said. "Sometimes the law is in books, but justice, that lives in the heart, and you don't need a degree to know the difference." Within hours, clips of the courtroom exchange began spreading across YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter. The moment where he said, "This medal isn't just metal," was replayed millions of times. Subtitles in multiple languages followed. Veterans groups shared it. Legal scholars debated it. Influencers reacted to it. Entire channels were dedicated to the Wallace courtroom moment. People weren't just watching a courtroom drama, they were watching a reckoning, a story that reminded them that true authority isn't always in a robe, and that respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. Comments poured in. "This man just schooled the entire justice system with dignity and facts." "I cried when she said he could keep the medal on." "This needs to be a movie." "My grandfather was a vet. I felt this in my soul." And then came the invitations. TV networks, law schools, civil rights organizations. But Wallace, ever humble, turned most of them down. "I didn't do it for fame," he told a small local reporter. "I did it so the next guy wearing a medal doesn't get told to take it off." He didn't need recognition. His legacy was already written, in service, in sacrifice, and now in principled resistance, and perhaps the most poetic part. A week later, a small plaque appeared just outside that courtroom door. It read, "In honor of those who serve," and "Continue to stand for justice at home," inspired by Henry Wallace. Sometimes, the sharpest mind in the courtroom isn't the one behind the bench or the one in the $1,000 suit. Sometimes, it's the one who walks in underestimated and walks out a legend. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. See you in the next one.